Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of MultiFamily with the amazing Veena Jetti. Thank you so much for coming over today.
Yes, thank you.
And I am super excited to see what the current situation is. So today we're going to do a little bit of a news update on what's going on with multifamily.
Like the state of the union in multifamily.
So what is pushing the current demand on multifamily?
Yeah, so I think when we're looking just at housing demands in general, it's really important to understand a couple of things. Mm-hmm. One is there are many hedge funds now that have rolled out single family funds. So they are spending billions of dollars buying single family homes. And they're not just buying a $10 million house that most average Americans wouldn't buy. They're buying that $200,000 to $500,000 home. And what's interesting about it is that is historically where Americans have held the majority of their net worth at retirement. And so now Americans are no longer getting opportunities to buy that. So they're becoming renters in those areas. Last year, 1 in 5 homes was bought by an investor. This year, it's 1 in 4.
Oh, wow.
So we're seeing more and more activity on single family homes from investors. Now, you couple that with the idea that interest rates are increasing. So what you might have been able to afford, let's say you could have afforded a $2,000 mortgage 6 months ago when interest rates were at like 4% or 5%. And now as they get closer to like 6%, 7%, maybe you can only afford $1,400 or $1,500. So it changes the value of the house that you can actually buy. So now pricing's not coming down because the demand is still really high, but also interest rates aren't coming down, so you can buy less house. And then when we look at replacement costs of building new properties are very, very high. So replacement value is high. So it's creating kind of this perfect storm for a lot of people who would otherwise be really qualified and great buyers to not be able to buy single family homes that they once could. So instead, what are they doing? They're looking to those solid B-class, A-class assets that they can rent so that they can put their kids in, the best school districts, or they want stabilized areas, or maybe they're saving more for a down payment now so that they can reduce the debt to income ratio for the mortgage they need on that same house. So all of those economics working together is creating a large drive toward rental properties. I think it's also really important to note too that with inflation being as high as it is, the buying power of your dollar today is just not as strong as it was 2, 3, 4 years ago. And so you're able to buy less just inherently without all of these external forces exerting pressure on the state of the market today.
That's right. And if anything, I feel like for all of these buyers that could have been amazing back in the days, they're turning them into amazing tenants for all of the people that are investing into multifamily.
Absolutely. They're good credit tenants. They care about their credit. They have good jobs. They have stable financial situations. And I think it's also important too to note that the younger generations, right? Like, so the younger millennials. The younger millennials, the Gen Z. What are they calling the next generation? Gen Alpha, I think it is. I
think so.
I think my kids are Gen Alpha or something. And so anyway, these generations, a lot of them, they don't necessarily want home ownership, right? Because they're kind of the suitcase lifestyle, if you will, where they don't want to own a car. They want to Uber everywhere, right? They don't want the hassle of that. They are more likely to change jobs. They're more likely to participate in the gig economy. So for them, home ownership isn't what it was when the baby boomers were in their prime, right? That was a different generation where the American dream was home ownership and a picket fence and 2.5 kids or something. And so, now it's different, right? People are not getting married as young. They're not having kids as young, if they're having kids at all. So the American dream and the makeup of what America looks like has changed significantly as well.
That's right. And I feel like our newer generations are focusing more on experiences rather than owning assets.
Absolutely.
Because those assets for them is oh no, this is tying me up to a certain place.
Right, to a certain location. You can't leave your job. You can't go on a vacation for months and months and months. A lot of people, especially amidst COVID, they started giving up their rentals or giving up their homes and then traveling to Belize for a month and getting a short-term rental there, or going to Europe for a month. And so it's just become a much more transient lifestyle than we're historically used to in previous generations.
And also with teleworking, I feel like it's way easier to just like keep working from whatever location you want to be at, which is perfect for multifamily because in the end, we're not asking the tenant to stay there for 20 years because they can just come in as in a short-term rental kind of basis.
Short-term meaning like a year.
Right, that's a year.
Okay. Yeah, as I say, not short-term like you can be here for 3 days, but yes, a year.
That's right. Now, when it comes to the baby boomers, because you also mentioned that it is kind of affecting into the market as well. What is the impact that the baby boomers are having right now within multifamily?
Yeah, so I think one thing to consider is a lot of Americans don't have enough for retirement. And because earlier I had said that most Americans hold the majority of their net worth in their primary home, the primary home is becoming a means for supporting retirement. So we're seeing reverse mortgages or baby boomers that are selling their house so that they can go and rent and they can get the equity out of their home, because equity in your home is an unrealized asset, right? It's unrealized equity. You can't go and spend it. You can't invest it. It's not generating income. And so I think with baby boomers, as we're seeing that happen more and more, we're seeing less homes passed down to the next generation because they're selling. And so one, it's again affecting that younger generation where now they're coming to rent. I think two, we're also seeing more of a demand for rentals because baby boomers are taking advantage of the market and they are selling those assets and they're moving to rental communities. Maybe they're moving to assisted living facilities, but there's a lot of communities that are being developed now that are just 55 plus. And that's taking a whole different sector of homes out of the marketplace for younger individuals. Our demographics on our assets are typically going to be, in the 30s to 40s, maybe early 50s. That's generally our demographic that we shoot for in Class B value add assets. That's
right. And I feel like also another factor for the baby boomers is that they are a little bit fearful of owning a house given the crisis that we're currently in. I mean, they've seen so many crises back in the day and how bad it was for the housing market that they are trying to transition out of it as fast as they can.
Yeah, I think the upkeep and maintenance of the house is more overwhelming than just where the market is in general, because I actually think it's maybe the opposite a little bit. I think baby boomers might feel like, hey, this is like the one piece of land that I own and it might provide security and stability. But with rising costs, so labor costs, utility costs, I mean, electricity is through the roof. I live in Texas where it's astronomically expensive. What my air conditioning bill like a year ago was maybe $300 or $400. Today it's like $800.
Oh, wow. That is a lot.
It's very expensive.
That's true. No, you were also mentioning that there are not that many families having kids now. How is that affecting the market for multifamily?
Yeah, I think that people are just, more than that, they're waiting till later to get married and combine households, right? So when you're doing that, you're not necessarily starting to look for the school district. You're not necessarily looking for the space, right? Because before, when women were in their 20s, they would get married and settle down and they'd become homemakers, right? And we're just not in that society anymore, right? Like women are starting businesses at a higher rate than men, and women are graduating from medical school at a higher rate than men. So women are now becoming equals. And, there's still a long way to go, but that's a different podcast. But, we're becoming equals and we are starting to really have our own financial independence, which was historically not a thing for our gender. And so with that, we're starting to see women that are buying homes on their own, but also that are waiting and they're renting for longer. So we're seeing a lot more rentals for longer periods of time because that home ownership age has been increased.
What about, because you mentioned some of the quote unquote minorities, which is women, but we also see some immigration coming into America. So how is that affecting in the multifamily area? Because I know that there's more immigrants coming over to America more and more. I mean, I'm one of them.
Yeah.
So I've been here
I'm the daughter of two.
Right. I mean, I've been here for like 6 years, but I see so many different economical issues in some other countries that are pushing migration into America. So how is that affecting multifamily?
Yeah, I think, you know, again, it goes back to a supply and demand issue. There's just not as much supply as we need, and especially in our core markets. We have way more demand than we can actually supply in the multifamily space itself. And this is something we track, right? As we're going into assets, we want to know how many units are being planned, how many permits have been pulled, how many assets are going to come up in our markets and in our areas that are going to compete with us. So we look to these numbers very significantly as we're buying our assets. I think even more than that, than immigration from other countries, is looking at the migration patterns within the United States itself. So we invest in Texas, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Arizona. Those are our core markets we look at as of today. And, you know, those are always changing. We're always adding markets. Right. But why do we select those markets? Because there is a migration happening from other states and other areas with the tenants we want in our assets. They're coming and they're moving, and we're adding jobs. We're adding populations that can afford the rent and that can really be a good solid tenant base for us. So you want to look at migration patterns even more than immigration, because immigration might mean that they'll come to anywhere in the US, right? An immigrant could go wherever education, job, family takes them. But with migration patterns in the country, we see what the real-time movement is from California to Florida, from Chicago to Texas. And we can see that in real time.
And what are some ways that you actually find what those patterns are?
Yes. One, I think you should, the easy way, right, is to look to what Blackstone, Starwood, all of the really big players are doing, because they invest in infrastructure. They invest in highways and roads and utilities. So they're investing in the infrastructure. If they're investing in the infrastructure of an area, it's because they know it's going to be growing and they know there's going to be demand. They have millions, hundreds of millions of data points. The other metric I also really like to look at, and okay, this is like a little secret sauce.
Oh, yeah. Are we allowed to say it?
I mean, I don't know. I'm going to. So
let's do it.
Let's keep it between us.
Yeah.
No, when we look at assets, we like to look at how close the nearest Starbucks is.
Oh.
Because Starbucks does a lot of market research and a lot of data research. And so they know if you can afford a $6 cup of coffee, they're going to put a Starbucks in that location, right? It's different than putting something like a McDonald's, where McDonald's, you can have $2, $3, $5 and still buy things off their menu. Starbucks is a commodity and it's very expensive. Right. And so if there's a Starbucks there, the chances are good that Starbucks has said, okay, there is a high income population and there's enough of a base here, for a customer base, for us to be profitable in this location. So we like to look for how close the nearest Starbucks is. Like one asset we just made an offer on like 2 months ago, there was a Starbucks in the same parking lot. We were like, great, this is awesome. And obviously it's not the only metric, but it's definitely a strong indicator for us.
It definitely helps because like, then again, you're not targeting any type of public. You have a specific target audience that you're focusing on. Exactly. And I feel like that's one of the key takeaways also for our audience. Try to look for the population that you want to target, so that way you can start looking at the assets that you want to invest on. You also mentioned that you guys are investing right now within Class B or Class A complexes. What about Class C? What is the situation right now for those buildings?
I think it's tough right now because inflation is so high. Interest rates are going up. The cost of everything is going up. So I think Class C, which is traditionally like workforce housing, it's a lot of people that are not necessarily making enough money to make ends meet. And of course, you want someone to be able to afford rent and food and all the basic necessities when they're in your asset. But then the question becomes, like during COVID, what happened? They were out of work for 2 weeks because they were quarantined and they can't sustain the missed paycheck. And so it's just a lot more pressure on lower income or workforce housing families. So personally, I prefer to stay more to like the Class B, Class A minus, B plus assets because it's got more stabilized tenant base. So they missed 2 weeks of work from quarantine. They still have the reserves or they have the savings to be able to go in and pay their rent and maintain stability for us on the asset. That's
right, because you as an investor, you want to make sure that your asset is secure and that it's actually having a pretty consistent income coming in.
Correct.
You may have any emergencies or something like that coming on, but still you have a really good tenant base that you can rely on. Awesome. Thank you so much again, Veena. Yes, and thank you to our audience. So there you have it. So many reasons for you to start investing into multifamily. Yes. So go out there and let's start it. See ya.